Good morning on the 15th of February 2022, 2-acre gård, 2 Oaks Farm, 60th parallel in Sweden. A few things today. I'm going to do another sheep move. I'll take a quick video of that because it's a very quick thing to do at this moment. I want to show you the disaster that this winter is weather-wise. And I want to share some thoughts on swales versus sheep, both as means to improve the hydrology of land. Let me start though with showing you what is going on the meadow, or at least on, well, I would say 80, 90, more like 80% of it. There's a solid layer of ice, and in places that ice is many centimeters thick. It has been thawing off and on. Most daytimes have seen temperatures above freezing. Some nights just below freezing. Very few nights a bit colder than that, towards the -10 Celsius. I've only been here 7 years, but in that time I have never seen anything like this, and neither has anyone I've spoken to who have been here all their lives in some cases. Just solid ice on the ground, and this has been going on for at least 2 weeks now in varying amounts of ice. This makes grazing very much more difficult because it really destroys the grass, really, that has been preserved underneath the snow. So far it is now exposed with really extremely weird temperatures and water and ice and snow situations. It is really not good. Even so, I am still grazing sheep on green grass, although the percentage of green in what they eat is definitely going down because of these circumstances. But I am still completely hayless, apart from once when planning and unexpected necessary moves made me decide to feed them hay once instead of moving them on that day. That was just a planning thing. For all the other reasons, I could have been totally without hay so far. One observation of having no snow but ice on the ground, and what you see here might still be cold snow, but it really isn't, not in the proper way. When there's a proper snow cover, which should be about a meter at this time, normally speaking, animals like voles and mice can burrow in the snow, have tunnels from one important part of their living area to another. Now there is no such possibility, so they are either exposed when they travel, or maybe they can't at all in these circumstances, or much limited. I don't really know. Any underground burrows that are there are probably flooded entirely and then frozen. I think this is really quite a disastrous happening, these weather conditions. Right, I'll make my way to the flock, move them very quickly, and then we'll move on to the swales. Here we are. They are very willing to move. Looking at the grass though, there is still a lot here. Hello, can I feel your stomach? Actually, well, they're not full, but then they rarely are in the morning. They do fast. Brucey here is definitely full. Well, you see there is still quite a lot of green there. Much of it is lying down though. There is a lot of manure on the ground. So I guess I could leave them here for one more day, but I won't. Since we're strip grazing, they will still have access to this bit, but I'll add this bit here, which looks quite a bit better. That said, over the last few days, the percentage of green has dropped really drastically, so the exposure and the weather has killed off quite a lot of the grass that was still green. Horrible conditions, truly. Okay, but I'll prepare the fence. I see I have a little bit more to do on that side, and then I'll come back and do the actual move. And that was that. Prepared. The electricity is off already. I have to take these clamps off and simply open the door for them, and there they go. Keeping a fence between me and Agnar, who's been a bit grumpy the last few days. And the heads go down and they eat. That is a nice sight. Clearly a lot more to eat here than in the last paddock. They have worked it hard. And the amount of manure is quite good. So that does look like a happily grazing flock again for another few days. This paddock I just added is the before last one in this grazing system. I have one more triangle for them, and in total, based on how they handled the last two paddocks, this should be enough for 6 more days, hopefully 8, but we'll see about that. And by that time the next grazing area should be finished for them to get into, and there should be at least, well, that's hard to say with the weather conditions, but at least 2 more weeks, hopefully 3 or 4 more weeks of grass for them in there, which might carry them to the start of the growing season, depending on how that goes. So compared to what I've shown you earlier, the grass here, or rather the ice situation here, is a lot better. Of all the parts that we have, of the whole meadow that we have, I suppose this gets more sun than any other part. So the melting has gone faster here. Funnily enough, just outside the fence there, really just outside, there's a lot of ice again. Of course, the fence is right at the key line, basically, of the slope, and then where the slope evens out, that makes more of a difference than the fence itself, obviously. So I'm kind of happy that I did keep these paddocks for last in this grazing system, because yeah, if these would have been amongst the worst, then all this grass would have been covered by ice and it would have been useless. I'm going to take away this net fence, because that is now of no more use. It's in their way on the way to the shelter over there. That will take me at most 5 minutes to take that away. I can store that, and then it's time to look at swales and talk about how swales and sheep compare in restoring hydrology. Okay, net cleared and set up for where I need it last time. On sheep and hydrology then, or much more specifically on holistically planned grazing and hydrology, because conventional grazing harms hydrology of the land. Holistically planned grazing improves matters a lot. Through holistically planned grazing, in a nutshell, keeping your animals in a space which they can heavily impact, eat most and trample the rest, within 3 days, and then you move them on and they do not return to that first bit until it is fully recovered, both the above ground green parts and the roots, and then you can graze it again. This is like training muscles. You damage them to a degree without real structural damage. you tax them heavily, and then they have time to recover and they grow stronger. And if you do that repeatedly, every time they get stronger. The same is true for plants which are naturally parts of grasslands, because they have not evolved despite grazing animals, but with grazing animals as an inseparable part of that community. Conventional grazing, however, is like either over or under training muscles. Overtraining is like grazing them too often, so that every time the damage compiles on the last damage which has not recovered, and eventually you get real injury. And over resting, in grazing terms, not grazing often enough, is just like not using the muscles, and so they get weaker because of that. This means that the plant cover in a holistically grazed area is much healthier, more diverse, the plants are stronger, the roots go down deeper, they sequester more carbon in the soil, which the soil life then uses partially to feed the plants again, so on and so forth. It's quite a bit more complex than this short story, but it kind of does the trick. It grows topsoil, carbon-rich topsoil, which holds water effectively much better than mineral, basically almost or completely dead mineral soil, because that loses water very quickly if it gets any. And proper healthy soil covered with perennial plants is much better at holding water for a long time. And that in itself is a way to very rapidly and safely cool temperatures. There's a long talk by a guy named Walter Jene, that's almost like a German pronunciation, I guess, but I'll try and put a link in the description, and that is extremely worthwhile to get a better understanding of how hydrology of the soil can help quickly and safely cool a heating planet. And if there is any proof that the planet is heating, then this winter is it, and not just this winter, because this is only the worst one in a row of consecutively worse ones. Excuse me there. So sheep improve hydrology. Again, much more specifically, holistically planned grazing of any grazing animal improves hydrology of soil, and that positively impacts the small water cycle, but if done at scale, it will much improve the large water cycle and even climate as a whole. Now I'm on the way to some of the swales that we have. Well, I only have 3. The sheep only arrived in May 2020. So before that, this land has been resting for a few years after being used as hay land, so cutting the grass once a year and then taking it away with all the nutrients. So it was quite poor when we got it, and letting it just grow for up to, different parts were managed differently, but up to 4 years of resting initially did it a lot of good. But then it started getting poorer again, the growth and the diversity. And then the sheep grazing has improved that in just 2 growing seasons quite dramatically. To put that in numbers, the last winter, some of these paddocks were used an X number of days for an X number of sheep. That, multiplying that, say 10 sheep for 1 day in one area, is 10 sheep days. Hope that makes sense. And then calculating the number of sheep days that they could have in certain paddocks proved to be between 2 and 3 times more this winter compared to last winter. So 2 to 3 times more food managed to grow for them in these paddocks the last growing season compared to the first growing season that I had them. that is quite a dramatic change. And that will translate itself into more carbon sequestered in the soil, into more water being held in that soil, and both of those will then have yet another cyclical positive impact on the plant growth the coming growing season, which is just round the corner now. When we just got here, however, I did not know about holistically planned grazing yet. I did know a little bit about hydrology. I was very much into permaculture, and permaculture has, as certain branches of permaculture at least, are very big on swales, and a swale is what you see here. A swale is a ditch on contour, although it can be slightly off contour. There are a few concepts, but we chose to do 3 swales on contour on this piece of land. So there's one here, there is one here just on the ridge, and then there's one slightly higher up. They are now all full of water. Here there are no swales, even though the ground, due to the activity of the sheep the past 2 years, is much more capable of absorbing any water that falls on it or flows over it. But now it is flowing downhill because, of course, the ground is frozen. Even now with these ridiculously high temperatures for this area, the ground is frozen, so water cannot penetrate, and all it can do is either evaporate. With this weather that doesn't happen too much, I imagine. And the only other option is to flow downhill through the forest into the lake, being of no use whatsoever to the soil here. Having dug these 3 swales, done by digger, which we rented, which took a lot of time because of no experience until then using a digger, and it being quite costly as well, so time and money were an issue. So we stopped after having dug this one. There were plans for 2 more on this piece of land, and then going all the way up from the top all the way to the bottom there, we planned to have at least, well, I don't even know anymore, but I think at least 10 swales on that part of the land as well. Then, learning, however, about holistically planned grazing, I decided that this would have to wait, or maybe not come at all anymore, because the sheep would improve the hydrology so much already, and possibly in better ways. Because what happens with swales, not so much in the growing season, because this land has really become a lot better at absorbing water. So during the growing season, there's hardly any water in these swales ever. Maybe with a very, very big rain event, which is extremely rare here. There is some water in the swales, and that will stay there for maximum a day, depending on how long the rain event lasts, of course. But very quickly the water sinks into the soil. And that is another reason why I decided to not go on with swales for now. Well, I decided that a few years ago, but I think I'm starting to kind of reconsider, because the swales are full here now. All of these swales, well, all 3 of them are full, and the amount of water, well, I'd have to calculate it, but it will be many thousands of liters, which, if there were no swales, would by now all have run off through the forest into the lake and have been lost. Now, however, when the ground in the swale thaws enough, that water will sink into the ground. You see here an unfortunate thing which has never happened before. The swale is actually overflowing. This is the lowest part in the, well, it's been dug out, and then what has been dug out has been dropped here as a sort of a dam. Very loose soil. This is the lowest part, and that is overflowing, so that water is still lost. But whatever the swale can hold will sink into the ground, but it's very concentrated. So the water, the meltwater that flows down, will concentrate in the swale and then sink in, usually quite deeply. That may be a bit different as the ground thaws from the top when the real thaw starts. So it may be limited still, the water that sinks into the topsoil, but in theory, generally speaking, swales concentrate the water and then seep it into the subsoil more than into the topsoil. So you're potentially replenishing aquifers, although this here is quite deep sand or loamy sand. So the first impermeable layer where the water will start gathering and building up a bubble again is probably really deep. But yes, that concentrating and then it going very deep into the subsoil was another reason to focus more on sheep on holistically planned grazing, because their actions will keep the water in the topsoil much more. However, with the winter situation as it is, and expecting more dramatic, horrible winters like this in the future, with the way the weather patterns are changing, there may be a real case for making swales after all, just to catch that melt water. Imagine, which is not all that hard to imagine, that there will be a very dry spring and summer. This could well happen, has happened before in the time that we were here. Then catching this water and keeping it in the soil, even if it is very deep in the soil, will be very, very valuable compared to losing it completely. So who knows, maybe I will be making more swales after all. And then the combination of holistically planned grazing and swales will basically bring the best of two worlds. During the growing season, optimal water, keeping the water in the land due to the grazing. And in winter, the added benefit of keeping the meltwater in the ground, especially this one is very full. Hoping that the next update will look a bit more positive on the ground, with really the way the ground looks, because this hurts to look at this. Okay, thanks for watching again.